glad to be here this morning. Having fun, wearing plaid. I do have plaid pajamas, but you don't want to see me up here in those plaid pajamas, right? You agree, thank you. I know, thanks, Brian. I'm also grateful that Joel asked me to preach this morning, and because we get to do communion together, and that's special to me. So for this fall, we have been walking through the Gospel of John, and today we're going to talk about John 9, and we're going to walk through it verse by verse, taking a look at what John had to tell us about the healing of a blind man. But this last Labor Day, let me start with that. My sweet husband, Brian, suggested, let's go to Branson, Missouri. I'd never been there before, didn't really know it was there. So on the 9-hour drive down there, we were looking for what shows we might go to. Oh, and I forgot my Dolly Parton Stampede glass over here. So we took that in, and we went to an illusionist show because that's what Brian likes. I'd never really been to one before, I don't think. And after all, the illusionist was from Brookings, South Dakota. Yeah! So, we gotta be a fan. And it was an amazing show. I really liked his style. It was different. It was the performance style was kind of different. But, honestly, I felt kind of uncomfortable. You put a woman in a box, you stick some knives in, you cut her in half, and she pops up, good as new. Something's hidden, right? Something's not true. And it makes you feel kind of uncomfortable because what you see with your eyes and what your brain is trying to process, they don't connect. You feel kind of discombobulated, maybe even deceived. The bottom line is that I just don't like being deceived, and I don't think most of us do. Not that the illusionist was trying to deceive us. Isn't that kind of his job? We did agree, we paid to go see an illusionist. But he wasn't upfront and clear and truthful. So generally speaking, I, along with most people, don't really like to be deceived in that way. We're not comfortable with a mystery, even though mystery books are the #1 seller. We'd rather have it stay in the book, not in real life. Sometimes we use these words to describe the unsettling experiences: incongruent, psychologically dissonant. And that experience is called a critical incident. Like someone lying to us about the truth, or thinking a relationship is one way and it's not, or believing that life should go a certain way and it doesn't. We in this room, we could tell plenty of stories like that, couldn't we? These are experiences when the circle of what we know to be true and how we thought we knew something was true or someone was true, when that gets pushed out of the circle. The ways we make sense of things have been pushed out of the circle. It's unsettling. It feels chaotic. And so we want to get back in the center where it's secure. But it seems like one of the tasks for us that Jesus keeps trying to teach us about is he keeps trying to push us out of the center of that thing that's secure so we can see things the way Jesus sees things, the way God had intended for us to live together in this world. Where does religion come into all of this? We are all searching for a safe harbor, for where we can make sense of these uncertainties, these mysteries. We've been doing it for all time across the globe, is what I believe. We're trying to find the answers. Religious helps us find ways of making sense of the bad stuff, the mystery, the suffering, the uncertainties of life. So we need to be careful as we think through what we see, to test it, and then to carefully choose what we believe is true about life. This is our life journey. As I said, this is what I think Jesus calls us to do and keeps kind of pushing us along, as we're going to see in this passage. The more we live in the presence with Jesus and surrounded by God's community, all of us here, the more comfortable we can become with what we know to be true and the mystery of what we don't always know and how to make sense of it. Let's start with chapter 9, verse 1. I call it a critical incident, this chapter, full of incongruence and dissonance, in which the people, the blind man's neighbors, the religious leaders, the blind man's parents, and the disciples, the followers, are all being pushed out of that circle of what they thought was true to a place of mystery and the opportunity to believe. Throughout the book of John, the writer keeps telling us these stories, chapter after chapter, and we hear the people's questions. Is this guy Jesus, they're asking, trying to make sense? Is this guy Jesus, who's performing miracles and speaking with such authority and teaching, claiming that he's the Son of God? Is he really the Messiah? So let's take a look at the passage. Let's hear about the healing of a man who was blind from birth. Let's walk through. Verse 1. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. This seems to be very important. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his sins or his parents' sins? It was not because of the sins of his parents or him, Jesus answered. This happened, the reason he's blind, so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I'm here in the world, I am the light of the world. Well, Jesus, right at the beginning of the passage, gives us the lesson, the answer. He told the disciples before he healed the blind man why the man was blind and that we must work according to what the Holy Book teaches us, the Bible. Okay, so now we know the lesson. Our bellies are full. We can go home. Oh, please stick around with me. Let's follow the different characters in this passage. And I also want to have communion together. Let's stay curious. Then he, Jesus, spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. He told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. What is this thing about spitting on the ground and making mud pies? Well, at that time, as commentaries tell us, this was a fairly common medicinal approach, making mud pies. And then going to the pool of Siloam, where that water was very special for cleansing and healing. It came from a cool story about how the city of Jerusalem was saved because of that living water that ran through underneath the city. I've walked through those tunnels. The water is really cold. But it's living water, and that's where he went to be healed. So it wasn't really the mystery so much of this mud making or mud pie making and the water that had everybody stirred up. It was something else. Let's get at what was really the mystery. Verse 8. His neighbors and other who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said, no, he just looks like him. Sounds like some of his neighbors who knew him all of his life didn't recognize him. I mean, this man had really been changed. Something very different was going on with this man. So how, if you were one of his neighbors, how would you respond? You knew what the blind man looked like, but this man had changed. He could see. Maybe he wasn't moving as slowly. He was walking fastly because he could see where he was going. And maybe his face glowed because he could see colors and beauty and people from only what he could have imagined in the dark. That was the only thing he knew because he was blind since birth, was darkness. So some of the neighbors weren't believing what they saw in this healed man because they didn't recognize him. It didn't fit with what they thought to be true. How could a blind man from birth all of a sudden now be able to see? What they knew did not equal what they saw. It was incongruent. Some of the neighbors' psyche was being pushed out of the circle of what was normal to them. Verse 9, continuing. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I am the one. They asked, well, who healed you? What happened? He told them, the man they call Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Where is he now? They asked. I don't know, he replied. Sounds like the neighbors' curiosity is piqued. They went to see for themselves to try to make sense of the miraculous change in this used to be beggar and blind man. They were curious. Does this describe some of your own spiritual journey? Unbelief, strange thing happens, skeptical questions, curiosity. Describes me. I am a skeptical believer. This is part of my journey. I think a lot of our journey. Verse 13. Then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees. Yikes. Because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man all about it. So he told them, he put the mud over my eyes, and when I washed it away, I could see. The healed man had to keep retelling the truth. Some of the Pharisees said, this man, Jesus, is not from God. Why? Because he healed on the Sabbath, and we're not supposed to do that. Others said, but how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous things, signs? So there was a deep division of opinion among them. Sound familiar? A deep division of opinion? Yeah. The Pharisees and others were trying to make sense of the mystery of what had happened. They were testing what they knew using their holy book, their Bible, the Torah, the book of laws, to make sense of things. They were trying to decide what they should believe about the person, the blind man, now who can see, and the person who did the healing. In my opinion, they were doing what I hope religious leaders and the rest of us would do. They were asking questions, testing what was before them. The problem is that sometimes we don't always get right what the book is trying to teach us. It seems to me that this is what Jesus, as I said, keeps trying to do. Push people out of that circle of security into what is true according to Jesus, not humans. When in your faith journey has this been your experience? when you're skeptical and you've probed the questions of, is this Christianity, this story of this God-man Jesus, true? Or am I just psyching myself out? That is a really common one for me. Am I just kind of psychologically pushing myself there? So I've been there, and it's part of so many of our faith journeys. If it's yours right now, I want to encourage you. Keep asking questions. Keep going boldly. Getting used to that unsettled feeling. God is with you, and God is there. We have a really big God who welcomes our curiosity and knows how to handle tough questions. Verse 17, then the Pharisees again questioned the man again who had been blind and demanded, what's your opinion about this man who healed you? The man replied, I think he's a prophet. So the man who was blind from birth, who can now miraculously see, is moving from, I don't know who this guy Jesus is, to Jesus is a prophet. To the Jews, a prophet is a holy person sent by God to tell the truth, even if the truth is hard to hear. The prophets did miraculous and mysterious and sometimes a little crazy things. They're the ones in the Jewish holy book, our Old Testament, the books of Samuel, Isaiah, Daniel, Hosea, and Micah, to just name a few, who told the Jewish people things like, this poor young shepherd named David, he's going to be your king one day. And, hey, nation of Israel, you are not paying attention to the poor and needy in your neighborhood, in your nation. You're greedy and your worship is insincere. Wake up and care for all people. Love your God alone. Don't worship people or things. Love your neighbor and even your enemy. Do what is right, cries the prophet Micah. Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly before and with God. It's the prophets who told people many times that a Savior, a Messiah, was going to come to this earth to save us from the bad stuff, the hard stuff, to save us here on this earth, but also in the next. He's going to walk amongst us and do signs and wonders, which is exactly what this Jesus did to the man who was born blind. Could Jesus be a holy prophet? The healed man proposed. Could it be that what was prophesied millenniums ago could be true about this Jesus for them? For us today, could Jesus really be our Messiah? Let's watch the process of this man, this healed man. Verse 18, the Jewish leaders still refused to believe. The man had been blind and could now see. So they called his parents. They asked him, is this your son? Was he born blind? If so, how can he now see? Good leaders. They're still testing what they're seeing and not believing blindly. Though I wish they could have been a little bit more like Nicodemus and kept their curiosity going and been open to the mystery, the unexplainable of a blind man made to see. Verse 20, his parents replied, we know this is our son and that he was born blind, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him He's old enough to speak for himself. Okay, so what do you make of them, their parents? You'd think they would be overjoyed, in utter awe. But the writer tells us why they responded the way they did. His parents said this is because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who had announced that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That's why they said, he is old enough, ask him. So it's not that the parents weren't willing to believe that Jesus was a prophet or even the Messiah. It's that they didn't want to be public about it. They were afraid of it. They would have been pushed out of the community, the Ummah is called, and out of their group, out of their social network, and probably out of their economic security in those days. And if we did that today, possibly in our social net and security. So let me ask, what would happen if we said this week, in calm and kindness, what we thought to be true about what Jesus teaches? Now, I'm not necessarily asking you to get in trouble this week, but what if we said, Jesus calls us to bless and serve the weak, the orphaned, the widowed, the poor, the foreigner, the incarcerated, our enemies. If we preached the literal meaning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount from Matthew 5, what would happen? It's a scary week ahead of us. Do you agree? And like I said, I'm not telling you to go out and make trouble this week or any week. But I am saying what I believe Jesus is saying in this passage. And it's at the center of this life of being disciples of Jesus, to be his hands and feet of comfort, generosity, service, mercy, and compassion to the least of these, in whatever sphere of influence each one of us finds ourselves in. And we shouldn't delay, says Jesus at the beginning of the passage, while there is still light in this world. And we are the light in this world because we have Jesus' Spirit within us. Verse 24. So for the second time, they called in the man who had been blind and told him, God should get the glory for this because we know this man, Jesus, he's a sinner. Well, I agree. God should get the glory for it, right? But what we know about this short phrase, that God should get the glory, is that what it meant was tell the truth. You're in the presence of God. We get this from Joshua 7:19. So the healed man replies in truth, I don't know whether he is a sinner, but I know this. I was blind, and now I see. But what did he do, they asked. How did he heal you? Look, the blind, healed man exclaimed, I told you once. Didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear the truth again? Do you want to be his disciples too? Oh, look, the healed man has moved from believing that Jesus is just a healer to a prophet who tells the truth, and now to Jesus as my master. And I am his follower. I think this is cool. But what makes me sad is that the religious leaders refused to listen. They didn't want to open themselves up to the mystery of healing and the central call of God of how to live life together. The religious leaders are so fiercely bound to the slavery and security of the laws, like not healing someone on the Sabbath, that it was keeping them and those they led from the central message of what Jesus taught, the way that was the way in the Old Testament book taught to us way back in Deuteronomy, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and mind, and to love others like healing them. Instead, the Pharisees, in verse 28, said, "Curse him," they said. "You are his disciple, but we are the disciples of Moses," who wrote Deuteronomy, by the way. "We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from." "Why, that's very strange," the seeing man replied. "He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from?" We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he is ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Now he's sounding like a really wise man. Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of a man, someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it. "You were born a total sinner," the religious leaders answered. "Are you trying to teach us?" And they threw him out of the synagogue, which is exactly what his parents were afraid of. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man. He went after him. He went after him. "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Jesus asked. And the man answered, "Who is he, sir? I want to believe in him." And Jesus answered, "You have seen him." Seen him. Remember, this is the blind man. You have seen him. And he is speaking to you. "Yes, Lord, I believe," the man said. And he worshiped Jesus. Then Jesus told him a hard saying. "I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind." Some Pharisees who were standing nearby heard him and asked, "Are you saying we're blind? If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty," Jesus replied. "But you remain guilty because you claim you can see." Wow. This used to be begging blind man has really shifted his seeing into deeper and deeper believing. He proclaims publicly and at risk of being thrown out of his community that Jesus is from God. Then says to Jesus' face that Jesus is the Son of God. "I believe." He trusts in Jesus and worships him. When in our lives do we take this kind of risk? It doesn't have to be only by words. In fact, more profoundly, it can be our actions, our love and mercy for one another, our service to others. The point is to serve, but not in order to save ourselves, because we believe in the one, the source, who is the mystery and the miracle of healing us spiritually and physically. Jesus is not an illusionist. Thank God. Though who Jesus was as recorded in the Bible, and who many of us experience today, can be a mystery. Who Jesus is, what we believe, can truly be a mystery. A wise man a brethren told John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, when he asked, I don't know if I have the faith to believe, the wise men said, act in service, and the faith will come, will follow. So Wesley did. And if you know anything about him, he served the poorest in a very dark economic and moral time in England. So often this is how I feel. I find that I must walk this life not necessarily having the faith, but I walk forward in my actions. And what I've learned is that the faith has followed, especially when I can do it in a community of believers like this. I still test Scripture. We study Scripture like we are doing today. And we do that together, asking one another questions, testing what's going on, and then we move forward. I think it's the best life. I do. Following Jesus has been the best life. And God darn it, it hasn't been easy, has it? But it's been the best of life. And so this morning, around this table of communion, coming together, we're going to remember everyone is invited. Everyone is invited to remember Jesus, who laid his life down for us on the cross. He was a perfect, mysterious man on this earth, but he laid his life down on the cross for us, and his body was broken. He shed his blood for us so that we can know eternal life and hope in this life and in the next. I invite you all, consider your own spiritual journey. God's faithfulness, his prodding, his hound dog that won't let us go. Following after Jesus. I invite you to go to the different stations with our friends across the room where you can take the bread, the body, and dip it in the cup, Jesus' blood, and then come back and worship Jesus.